Welcome everyone to Mail Fuzz TV. I am Peter, that is Connor, and we are going to talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine Season 2, Episode 1. It is called The Homecoming. So, full spoilers for the episode as always. And we get a to be continued at the end of this, and I'd forgotten that the first 3 episodes of this season are all considered part of a 3-parter. I only just remembered that afterwards.
I didn't know that until I got to the end of this episode. I was like, huh. At the start of the season, and then I happened to see it.
Yeah, it's bold. They've got different titles, but they're listed as 1, 2, and 3 on my big master list that I've got.
By the end of this, it is very clear that it's a multi-part episode. It is not just a thematic thing.
But at the same time, before I realised that it was a 3-parter, part of me thought, oh, was this originally meant to be the season 1 finale? Because they like doing that in Next Gen, where they have part 1 and then the season break and then part 2. But the fact that it's a 3-parter means, this is just meant to be like a trilogy of episodes at the start of the season. So, fair enough. So this one, Kira, through Quark, we'll talk about a little bit of the opening in a second, but basically there's an earring, a Bajoran earring that they all wear, but specifically one of like a war hero from the occupation is discovered, and he was believed to be dead, but he's actually maybe still alive at a prisoner camp. On one of their planets, with Cardassia 4, I think was what they kept saying. And Kira wants to go on a mission to go and save him because, but Bajor's pretty unstable. This episode points out kind of like more extremist groups from within kind of starting to rise up. They literally refer to it as a group that is Bajor First, which made me think of Earth First. And I got a chuckle out of that. So it's like, oh, we need solid leadership. This provisional government is not doing very well. So, but yeah, so she goes and turns out this guy is alive, and it's Richard from Twin Peaks. And I didn't get it right away, but I was like, this guy seems familiar. Where do I know him from?
I was waiting how long till you referenced it, and it was about 20 seconds.
Was it 20 seconds? Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. But I didn't realize right away. It took a little bit, but not the only kind of notable guest star in this actually. Unless my eyes deceive me. Where's his name here? Why is he not? Is he listed on like the full cast? The Bajoran that shows up later, it looked like Frank Langella to me, but maybe I'm completely wrong. Oh no, it is. He's in the rest of the cast alphabetically. For some reason, I guess they wanted it to be a surprise in the episode, so he's not in the opening list of names.
It's a relatively small part in this episode, I guess. Which is why they buried it.
It's a big get though.
It is
for the show. I think that's anyway. That was the gist of the opener. It has a pretty big bombshell at the end, and it kind of does something that an episode of Next Gen did last season, but better. Simply just because it doesn't have the negative parts of that episode to kind of like sully it. And what I'm talking about is the episode where it's the Klingons debating, and like they've got the Emperor back, and like, oh, he's not really what we thought he was. But maybe we give him this honorary title anyway because he's a symbol. That part of it was interesting to talk about. This episode kind of brings that kind of subject back, but it doesn't have all of the the mediocre parts of that episode to go along with it. It just kind of has it in its pure state, and it actually works because, we've already had this Bajoran kind of like, the peace and the government starting to splinter and all this stuff was all set up last season.
So it sounds like you like this episode more than that one then.
Yes, I would say that for sure.
Yeah.
Did you?
I thought this was a pretty great episode. I would go as far as to say there was only one episode of season 1 that was better than this. Other than that, this was honestly, I think it was head and shoulders above the entire season, barring that one episode. I think it was a major step up.
It was a major Kira step up.
I thought after I said it, I was like, no, I'm not going to. And then you did it anyway.
I don't know if I would go necessarily as bold as a statement as that, but I will say that as I was watching it, it kind of felt like, when you start like Parks and Rec season 2 and you're like, oh, something's clicking here. Something's clicking in a way that it wasn't quite yet in season 1.
I don't even think it's necessarily anything in the script or anything that's like particular. Like, oh, it's better written and everything. I think it's a behind the camera sort of thing where there's a sense of confidence in that they know what they're doing now, and everything just feels more, more sure of itself.
Yeah.
It comes across in every performance.
Sense of direction as well, maybe. I mean, not that there wasn't direction before, because there absolutely was, but yeah, maybe there was a kind of finding their footing in season 1 where,
even the fact that they're starting on a 3-parter.
Oh yeah, that feels
a bit of a mission statement in itself, right?
Yeah, I think because there were several episodes in season 1 that felt like, these are next gen scripts that have been repurposed or whatever. It feels like they did plant the season 1. Like obviously the baseline with Bajor and the Cardassian conflict, Kira's entire thing, obviously Duet itself as an episode, kind of was really where it came into feeling special. And it set up a lot of things in the finale that I'm sure are going to be relevant, and actually already are in a lot of ways, but more directly, that character's probably going to show up again soon. But this immediately felt like, we've got like a sense of direction here, and we've got characters actually talking about, Sisko in this episode, he's addressing Kira's concerns, but he's also finally kind of going back to addressing, okay, what is our purpose here as Starfleet? Why are we here with Bajor? And it feels like, this planet might actually struggle, even though the enemy's gone. Now this like inner conflict might actually tear itself apart from within, kind of thing.
It definitely feels as if season 1, especially the back half of season 1, was almost like a prologue to what it wants to be right now. And not that that stuff was not enjoyable, because I think it was still pretty solid. But
yeah, what's so funny about that statement is that season 1 of Babylon 5, which obviously has been compared to Deep Space Nine a lot because of similar things between them. Season 1 of Babylon 5 is very similar in that it feels like, I would say season 1 of Babylon 5 is better than season 1 of Deep Space Nine. I don't know if that's a controversial statement. I think it has more interesting ideas and episodes sprinkled throughout its run. Although arguably no individual episode may be quite as good as Duet, but I would definitely say season 1 is a prologue, and then all of the real plot kicks in season 2.
I think it's interesting. I wonder if part of it is the time that these shows were made is kind of getting into that era of where network shows kind of, the really good ones kind of had a lot of that feel, where the season 1 was kind of this.
Yeah, Fringe, it's like that.
Yeah, that's another good example where there's a sense of season 1's okay. It's laying groundwork. It's solid. It's enough for you to keep watching. But season 2 is where they actually get into their core ideas a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think it's almost a case of they don't want to burn their good ideas if it gets cancelled after one season, and then there's maybe just more confidence. We've been renewed. We're in season 2. We feel more like a safe thing, at least for certain shows in certain times. I think that belief is all gone now. I think network shows especially just don't have that same reliability.
Honestly, I assume Deep Space Nine didn't actually have that same fear that a lot of shows have. I think it was riding high on Star Trek being pretty popular, and it probably felt fairly safe.
And I think it probably benefited that whilst it was going down its run, even once Next Gen was done, every so often, every 2 years, a Next Gen movie came out to kind of like, hey, the mainstream Star Trek's still a thing. So it kind of kept it relevant by being connected to that, So, and obviously, the health of Star Trek was very good because they started another show alongside this. Next season. There
was no immediate concerns now, for sure.
That's interesting.
Is this the first 3-parter that Trek's had? Because I can't remember.
Oh yeah, definitely. As far as at least officially a 3-parter, for sure.
Yeah. Obviously, we've had sequels to episodes, but not direct. Yeah, that's 3 different. Parts.
Yeah. Well, I think what's so weird about it is that technically this is the first 3-parter, but I'd also argue that inherently Deep Space Nine is a lot more serialized anyway. A lot more. Obviously, the episodes do have standalone plots, but a lot more of it is still relevant in there. Is even more. I mean, Next Gen was a huge step forward for that compared to the original series, but Deep Space Nine already after one season feels like another big step forward compared to Next Gen for that.
It absolutely is. But again, in terms of this kind of being a mission statement of a season in the way it came out the gates swinging, I think them officially calling it a 3-parter is this acknowledgement of this is a lot more serialized than other shows of its time, especially the Trek.
Almost to the point where I'm like, at the end of part 3, it's going to be, okay, we've finished our 3-parter, but really the next one's part 4. Like, we're not going to say that, but technically it is.
I wouldn't be surprised if it does feel like that come part 4, and this is more just just the symbolic statement.
Then again, I also acknowledge the possibility that maybe if they have a big 3-parter, the episode 4 might intentionally be a nice light standalone episode, just to give everyone a breather before we get back into more serious stuff again. I could see that as well. That would make a lot of sense to me. But yeah, so there's a few things I liked about this. So Quark, obviously, open of the episode.
Always a smart choice to open with Quark.
Well, opening with Quark and Odo, especially them together.
They know what they're doing. This is what I'm saying. There's this confidence. They know that they have this great chemistry with these two characters. Let's open with it. Start strong.
What I love about this is that the episode starts with Odo saying, right, you give me that intel on that, smuggling ring. And Quark's like, yeah, and how did it pan out? He's like, it turned out to be true. I arrested like 3 people and it brought the whole thing down. He's like, so I turned out to be telling the truth. Fantastic. And Quark goes to walk away, and Odo's like, wait a minute, something's not right about this. And Quark's like, what's not right about it? I can't think of what your motive for doing this is, and that's very unnerving. And I was just like, yeah, and I don't think the episode ever actually gives you a reason, and I'm just like, oh.
Well, he kind of addressed it with his brother after. His brother's like, why did you?
Yeah, true, he does.
And he's like, rule of acquisition 56, occasionally make peace with your enemies, keeps them on their toes.
Which it does, and it does. Odo's like really unnerved by this, and he's like, what's going on? Is Quark become a good person? Nah, that can't be it. There's something more to this.
There's an ulterior motive, clearly.
But some alien lady shows up, and she's all sort of sexy and sultry, and she's sort of flirting with Quark, and she's like, hey, I brought this thing back from Cardassian space. It's a Bajoran earring, and Quark is happy to take it off her hands, thinking he's going to get money for it. But he takes it to Kira. And honestly, the
request was just give it to a Bajoran. They'll understand.
Yeah, they'll know what it is. Yeah. So he goes to Kira, and I actually kind of love their back and forth here. There's basically Quark keeps like making little flirty jokes, like he's got a chance, right? He's like,
these two didn't actually interact that often.
Not much, no. Because he kind of like says, oh, your quarters, I always wondered what they were like. He's like, that better not be why you're here. And the scene goes on a bit, and he eventually, whips out the earring, and she's like, wait, where did you get this? And he's honest, he doesn't lie. He says exactly what we know to be true, and she rushes off. And that's actually it for Quark for a while for this episode. But later on, I'm just bringing this up now because the payoff to this made me laugh hysterically. Is later on, so Quark actually becomes a victim of this extremist Bajoran group, right? They're called the Circle. This is the Bajoran First movement. It's these extremists who want no non-Bajorans in Bajor, or by proxy Deep Space Nine, because it's a Bajoran space station. Earlier on, we saw that the symbol spray painted somewhere, and like everyone's like sort of talking about it. But these 3 guys with masks on, like, come in, presumably, and I say guys, presumably Bajorans, come in, and they basically burn their symbol into Quark's head, right? And he's telling everyone about this, and they're taking it very seriously. This is a big deal, and this obviously ties into why they need to convince this like leader who's come back to take charge and try and give strength and a direction to the planet and all that. But at the end of this scene, Quark, Bashir's in there with his little doohickey, and he's fixing it all up, and it's like, okay, yeah, it's Star Trek. He can just, take the branding away. He can take it away. It's all fine. But as everyone's leaving, Quark just says, wait, how do I look? And Kira turns around and just sort of smiles, and she's obviously being sarcastic and says, just as handsome as always. But Quark's reaction to that sentence broke me. The way he kind of puts his tongue up to like the top of his mouth, is like, yeah, handsome. Really handsome. Is that what you say? The way he turns around with a smug spring in his step, it just I was cackling.
Yeah. Honestly, that and the other scene with Quark, it's comedy gold.
Yeah, he's so good in this episode. And he's a relatively minor part of this episode as well.
He has that opening scene, this one here, and then I think the one where the bit where he's counting the money.
He's splitting these gold place platinum with his brother.
6 for me, 1 for you.
This isn't very fair. You're quite right. 1 for you, 7 for me, 1 for you. Although I was looking at what he was holding. He was picking up like 8 or 9 every time he did that. The sly little bastard.
Just when he says that, he just means handful for me.
Oh yeah, it's all good. That's right before he gets attacked. Yeah,
it is. But it was another bit that just really made me laugh. And interestingly enough, again, it's playing up this relationship with his brother that is, not necessarily in the best of places. We saw in the Negus episode that his brother was quite happy to plot against him, and definitely has a lot of resentment. So I would not be surprised to see that over the course of the show grow into something considerably more serious.
Yeah. But anyway, to get on to the main thing, obviously part of it is the circle stuff, and that's a big example of why Bajor's kind of in shambles and needs some help, because the government being so poor at running things has led to this movement. Like, people are turning to this extreme group. So Kira gets this earring, and she goes to Cisco and says, hey, I need to borrow a runabout. And he's like, well, you're going to have to tell me why. I can't just be handing out runabouts. This is a Starfleet vessel, after all. And she's like, well,
you really don't want to know.
I think there's a prisoner of war still being held in Cardassian space. I'm going to go break him out. He's like, yeah, you should have told me that. This is too much. Yeah. Although they play this, there's actually a little running joke here, which made it feel more like a unified group of characters again, is that by the time Cisco's kind of convinced by Dax that he should probably let her go and do it, because they actually do need this, right? The Bajor needs this sort of leadership to come back. Is the joke is that she already knows that Kira wants to go there, and Emily
told everyone.
Yeah, and when Cisco comes out and brings it up to O'Brien's like, "Oh, so you're letting her take the runabout to go to Cardassia 4?" He's like, "Has she not told anyone?" He's like, "I don't think she's told Quark." Well, as far as Quark is concerned, this is what she's doing with the ship. Then,
yeah, and then O'Brien's like, "Mate, I've got some suggestions." It's like, how long have you had to think about this?
So yeah, his whole plan here then is to send O'Brien with Kira, which she's not far at first, not because she isn't, like, for part of me was thinking for a second, oh, maybe it's because she's thinking I'm going to have to assassinate some Cardassians and I don't want Starfleet looking over me. But she actually brings up a good point, is like, hey, if this goes sideways and I get captured, maybe it's better for your deniability if there's no Starfleet officer on board. But she agrees, and so this is a Kira and O'Brien mission. So they go off to Cardassia 4, and they're going to the plan is just to beam up this guy. So I'll get his name actually, just so I'm not saying the leadership. He was Lee Nallis. Is that how you pronounced it?
Nallis, yeah.
So they're going to just beam him up, but they're like, hey, there's maybe 24 Bajorans down there.
They're expecting just him, maybe a couple. They're like, oh, this will be. We'll just grab them both. It'll be fine.
Yeah, but there's tons, and it's like, well, can we beam up more than 2? And he's like, no, we have to do 2 at a time. And as soon as we beam up the first 2, security and all that, all the ships are going to be sent after us. They're going to know something's up. We can't just do that. So we get this whole bizarre plan to sort of take down the slave camp by pretending Kira is a Bajoran prostitute, which apparently is a done thing. This is something the Cardassians would expect. And Kira has to pretend, and O'Brien is pretending to be her pimp, effectively. And the whole plan is that the guard at the gate, and when I say gate, it's a force field. He'll
let them in.
He'll let them in because he's like, oh yeah, I fancy a bit of that Kira. That's basically it. So she basically slightly seduces him and plays a little dumb until she gets an opportunity to whack him. And I appreciate
that wasn't the initial plan. The initial plan was, hey, she's here for the leader of the camp.
Yes.
And the plan was just, hey, just bluff the way through. Assume this guy's scared enough of his boss that he'll just let them through, no questions asked. Obviously, it goes a little off script, and she has to play it up a bit more. She
has to improvise, yeah. It's a fun little sequence though, because I think it was weird seeing Kira act flirty because her character's so far removed from that typically.
It is, but it plays well into her history being the freedom fighter rebellion group. She probably had to do some disguises and act a few different roles to get into places while undercover.
Yeah,
so it definitely makes sense.
O'Brien saying things like "Don't touch the merchandise" until I don't know. The whole thing was just kind of a little comical in a good way, in a sort of they were having fun with the fact that they were doing this infiltration thing.
Yeah.
And when I say they, I mean the writers were having fun with it, not the characters obviously are in a serious moment.
They're in a life or death situation.
Yes, but of course, you know, they rescue Nallis, they get everyone else. Well, they get most of them. Basically, they have to leave some behind because it's like, hey, we've got like a minute until all these Cardassian ships show up. We have a bit of a phaser fight, of course, at first as well. But they get out a good portion of them, including Nallis. And much to Kira's surprise, when they get back to Deep Space Nine and Nallis is getting medical attention from Bashir and whatever else, Cardassia has, you know,
basically disavowed what was going on there.
Yeah. Ducat gets on the comms and he's like, yeah, we want to send our apologies. We didn't know this like random camp was still operating, so you know, we don't, you know, like full apologies. And Kira's like, well, what about the rest of the slaves that were left behind? It's like, oh, they're on their way on a ship, on a transport, they're coming back to Bajor, you know, please forgive us. And it's actually phrased really well when Frank Langella shows up later. He's like, you know, what you did could have started a war. We're just lucky that the Cardassians didn't want to take the invitation. And they do say in the moment, Kira says, like, they must have a motive for being so nice right now. And which thematically neatly ties into the Odo Quark conversation at the start of the episode. And Sisko's like, yeah, you know what, I agree, but we have no way of like predicting that. We can't guess that.
I just have to go with it. Yeah.
But at the very least, something good comes out of it. We get all these people back. They're free now.
Kind of love how slimy the Cardassians are. Like, I think they're great as a villain.
Yeah, they're up. Like the only reason why they're being so nice about this is because they're hiding something else that'll get them out of trouble.
That, and the fact that they already had a treaty to end all the labor camps and to return all the slaves. So, yeah, okay, this one was still running. They're like, oh, we're so sorry, we had no idea. We're so glad you found it. Of course, we'll return all of them. Definitely 100 other camps still going. Yeah. And they're like, we got away with one, boys.
Yeah, and clearly, like, Bajoran sex slaves are a thing based on, like, the disguise they had. So I presume there's probably tons of Bajoran women just sort of hidden away in Cardassian space.
Yeah. And as much as they're going, oh, well, they could have gone for war, they're basically saying, oh, yeah, we're kind of glad you didn't catch us out any more than we did. You know, we'll just cut the loss. We'll disavow this one. We'll say it was a mistake. We didn't know anything about it. We're so sorry. And we'll let the other, all the rest of the slaves carry on working as they are. They'll be fine.
And that's the interesting thing is that Nallis, it becomes clear that they didn't know that Bajor was free. Like, they didn't find out. It's not like Cardassians told them, oh, by the way, we've left Bajor, but you're still our prisoners. Like, this was a surprise to him that Bajor is now free and that the Federation are here, co-running this station, and this is all news to him. Which, by the way, just before I forget, there was a nice little reference. O'Brien said that he knows what happens when a Cardassian, takes a prisoner, and I'm like, oh, that's a neat little reference to his time in Next Gen. Yeah, I appreciate that. So, and very quickly something felt a bit off here. Not that this guy felt shady by any means, but his reluctance to speak to the crowd that forms around him on the promenade, his reluctance to really kind of, he talks to Sisko and Sisko tells him about the situation right now. And hey, they need your help. Hell, I need your help to try and help Bajor out. We need to improve everything. So it wasn't a surprise when he tries to sneak away on another ship, right? And he gets caught and immediately just gets sent to Sisko. And that's where the great conversation of the episode kind of takes place, which is like, look, this legend spread because of a mistake. All I ever did, the reason why people looked at me as a leader is because after I survived, I just was lucky. Me and two other Bajorans survived a Cardassian attack during the war, and I happened to stumble on to one of their leaders in his underwear when he was bathing in a lake. And in a moment of stupidity, I was able to fire my phaser first because he didn't have his on. He went to reach for his with his clothes, and I got the first shot off. I was lucky, and it was like a stupid death on his part. He was embarrassed before he died. That was how this played out. But this spread, people who then stumbled on us, and the story spread, it became, oh, he took out one of their leaders. He must be a great warrior. Oh, he's, and as Sisko calls it, he became a legend, and it really isn't true. He just kind of stumbled into success, effectively.
Yeah.
So I think that was a very interesting way to take this, because at no point did it ever become, oh, he's a liar, or in fact, if anything, he hates the fact that this legend spread. He's been trying to distance himself from it.
It's one of those things where there is a core grain of truth because he did kill the guy, right?
Yeah.
But it just wasn't this epic single combat like it was made out to be.
Yeah.
And I can see this going multiple ways, and all of them can be interesting depending on what they want to do. They can go the route of he decides to play up the legend and just become, trying to play up the persona for the good of Bajor, right?
Yeah.
Like, he'll act the strong leadership even if he doesn't feel like he deserves it. Maybe he comes clean, and it goes down that route, and there's still instability, and there's different possibilities that it can play with here. That none of them will feel like a weird left turn out of nowhere. None of them will feel out of character for what they've set up so far. I think that's it's really strong rhyme with what they've done with this guy so far.
Yeah, and it does seem that he's given this new role in the government. They make up a new role specifically for him. And that's what we find out at the end of the episode. And they also just casually say, hey, he's now like the ambassador here. He's not staying on the planet. He's going to be up in Deep Space Nine as the ambassador who's like dealing with these big decisions up here. And Sisko's like, well, I've got Kira. And Franklin Gell is like, well, she's actually been reassigned. She's not going to be here anymore. And that's where you're like, oh, wait, this is going to be I was like, oh, wait, there's like 30 seconds left. Okay, well, dun, to be continued. Obviously, I expect she'll somehow be back in her role by the end of the three-parter, but we'll see how we get there.
Yeah, she'll definitely be back. Again, and going back to my previous point, whether it'll be because Nihilus has stepped up and is now the leader of Bajor, or if it's because he's removed himself from the situation because he had to come clean. Yeah,
or possibly even this extremist group kill him because he comes out like speaking, saying, "Oh no, we should be welcoming to our friends."
Maybe he's pro-Federation.
Yeah, and that gets him assassinated effectively. Or, any number of things. Like, is it because he's dead, or is it because he chooses to be elsewhere, or is it because he's needed elsewhere? Like any of these possibilities could arise.
I think that's why I think this episode is, partially, why it's so strong by the end, is that it has so much potential in where it goes. And it's not sometimes you'll watch an episode and you'll get 2/3 through and you'll be like, okay, if this doesn't do this or that, it's probably going to feel a little underwhelming because it's such a, there's low-hanging fruit. This has just such options to pick from, and all of them can be really fulfilling in different story ways.
Well, I think they've set up enough of the politics of what Bajor is that what he could be for Bajor is, we can understand it, but they've set up in this particular episode his personal feelings about who he is and what he can contribute. And we understand what everyone else thinks he can contribute. We understand that he doesn't really feel that he can, but Sisko's like saying, no, you can just be this for them. It's not really about the truth of it.
He can just step up and play the role, yeah.
Yeah. Even it doesn't mean that you have to make the big decisions all by yourself. It just means that you can be there to give everyone a sense of confidence, and it'll sort of maybe unify more people than were before. And I think because they've set all these things up, it means that they've effectively set up a playground where everything makes sense and we understand the rules, and it can go, like you say, several ways, but all of them, as long as they stick to all of the things they've established, all of them will feel fulfilling, or like they're leading to more creative, interesting story ideas with these characters. It's not binary, which is really good.
Right, just to make a weird slight tangent, it's related, I promise.
Okay.
You know how there's a lot of video games like the Telltale games where it's like, oh, you make a bunch of choices, but by the end, kind of get to more or less the same point. And some people completely disregard those games because they're like, well, none of your choices matter. It makes no difference. And I think this three-part here is a perfect example of why that style of storytelling, why it does matter, the choices, but also it's okay because we've just said, right, Kira's going to be back in her post by the end of these 3 episodes. There are clearly multiple different ways that can be accomplished, but that doesn't invalidate the end point.
Yeah, I think that's a bad comparison because I do think those games feel like your choices don't matter as you're playing them. Whereas the variables in this are far more intriguing because there's a written script where people are actually putting in all this intentional intrigue. I don't think there's a difference. I see the point you're making, but
I will say on some of the really good ones of the. There are good and bad examples of those types of games. Let's make that very clear. Just as there are good and bad examples of TV shows. I think on the good ones, all the choices still do feel intentionally scripted and acted, and it feels rewarding, as a story in its own right.
Okay.
They don't feel like, obviously some of them will just feel.
I don't want to get into this as a whole debate, but I do think the illusion of choice in video games is very overrated, and I do think it's different when it's interactive versus a story that's being told. The reason why this works is because it's not interactive and there is no choices as the viewer. We are watching the choices the writers have made so that our minds think of all these different possibilities, and any one of them are possible. But ultimately, it is still on a track, because all writing is, effectively. We're on the track that the writers are on.
We just don't know what the track is right now.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. So I think all of that here works really well. And I this is a great season opener. It's kind of immediately just hit the ground running with building on the political climate they set up. They've expanded it already with this extreme group. They've expanded it with this potential new character who may be here for a while. He might be gone by the end of this three-parter. Both of them feel very equally plausible. But it also gave us fun stuff with Quark and Odo and all these other little bits and pieces that we like about this show. And there's even a little subplot with Jake that we've not mentioned yet, which does feed in thematically a little bit to this rising discontent where some of the Bajorans don't like that there's non-Bajorans around. Because Jake's got a date with a girl, he's all excited about it. He goes to his dad. Sisko thinks he's there. Oh, you're here to ask the little man how to ask her out, and he's like, no, I've already done that. She said yes. Like, we're good. I just want to know what she do. But it turns out later the date got cancelled because her parents didn't like that he wasn't Bajoran. And I thought this actually, it worked well on its own little thing. Obviously, it ties into the greater thing, which is nice. This is like a personal, effect of it. This is how it's affected Jake personally. But I think there was a nice little bit of meta thing here, just because Sisko and Jake obviously are black. I think the idea that you could easily swap this out to a white family saying, oh no, you're not dating him because he's not white, immediately just gave this good subtext and weight. That's always the type of thing that this represents. Not exactly that always, but this type of thing. So I think works really well. It works
extra well in here because obviously sometimes you can get that, and it feels like it's very surface level, right? The commentary. I think this doesn't. I think part of it is it's not just this episode; it's just the way the show's been set up.
Oh, this is this is the entire mythology of the show that set this up. Yeah,
it is. But even specifically the last few episodes of this show, going back to the last season, like dealing with the schools and like how maybe we want segregated schools. For the we want you to teach this religion. There's all these things that are playing into this that make it feel really natural in the episode. And it doesn't feel like the writers are, going, oh, hey, look at this. It feels like, no, this is the point.
Yeah, and when Sisko sits down and he has to try and comfort him, he doesn't really have a good answer. He just says, this isn't fair, and I know it's not fair. But I think what I like about it beyond anything else is that if you didn't believe Sisko was personally motivated to try and help Bajor and try and help them through this, I think this sort of moment's no, on some small level, his son just got rejected for not being Bajoran, and if this is the sort of thing he can at least influence in a tiny way to make it more welcoming, to make it better, this is just a little bit of that to go into why he might be personally motivated, beyond just his own duty and all that thing. This is just a little bit in the episode to be like, hey, if you need a reason that's on the screen, there's one. So I think the show, the fact that we've talked about it the way we have compared to maybe, the episode where they're going through a game and there's goofy stuff happening. This has been a lot more about the politics, the character motivations, and how the world's going to try and hopefully heal or fix itself.
This is why I said it felt head and shoulders above 90% of the first season. And not that the first season was bad. Most of it was perfectly good. Whereas I feel like this was already borderline, this is a great episode in terms of...
Yeah, it was a baseline to get to know the characters, and now we're kind of okay, we've set up the world, we've set up the characters, now we get to the real meat of the narrative and the story and what we're really playing with. And the fact that there is something interesting here about dealing with the idea that the Federation are the outsiders in this, and they're trying to help, but it's not their own people, I think is a very interesting perspective to do this story from. And maybe I said some of that back in episode 1, season 1, but
it's interesting. Every so often I find Star Trek is a very American-centric viewpoint, and it's not always relevant. Obviously, that it's inherent in its bias in just the way it's set up because of it coming from predominantly American writers and creatives.
Notably, it's an ideal American viewpoint, though, as opposed to
it is. But I think even here now, where they say the Federation, the Outsiders, they're the one, like Cisco here. Cisco, for all intents and purposes, the good guy, our hero of the show, is saying, I kind of want you as Bajor's leader because it's good for me to have stability. Definitely has some parallels with Americans maybe wanting certain leaders in various countries for the stability, for their own trade deals, etc.
Yeah, I mean, notably, the Federation and Cisco's intentions are obviously a lot more noble than those real-world examples, right? Obviously, the whole point of the Federation is to help civilizations, and eventually they want Bajor to be a part of the Federation, presumably.
It absolutely is, but I think looking from the outside, you can definitely see this being the American interventionists, with going into them being part of the Federation. You could even see it as an expansion into imperialistic ideologies, which are definitely is part of a lot of Western history in terms of the way our history is taught. So I definitely feel like that's inherent in that, and I'm not saying that's necessarily a good or bad thing. I just think it's really interesting to see. That's the viewpoint this show has unconsciously. Yeah,
I mean, I think it's like, again, we know the motivations. We know that ultimately they're always going to have a choice to be in the Federation or not. They're going to have a choice, for anything they do, right? Because we understand the ideals of Starfleet and all that, right? And that's the idealism of the future that Star Trek is founded upon, and that's all great. But yeah, you can absolutely see how some people in Bajor on the ground will see them as outsiders, see them as trying to benefit for themselves, even if we know that's not true. But you can see, on some level, you can start to compare Bajor to Vietnam if you really want to, and how, one side is going to feel differently. And again, it doesn't line up exactly, but you can definitely see the comparisons and why you might go down that path of thinking.
I think, while I get that comparison, interestingly, I think, especially given how, the time period that this was made, I think it's more along the lines of Iraq and Afghanistan.
Oh, sure, yeah.
That area. But, I mean...
Vietnam's just the most famous one, to be honest.
I think it's a little bit more specific parallels with what this feels like to me here. And again, given that would have been a lot in the news at the time, especially, I'm assuming these writers were relatively well informed of topical events. As how can you write a science fiction show and not be up to date on current affairs? That would be bizarre, right? But yeah, I'm fascinated to see if it continues on that trajectory and kind of what it plays with along that.
But Star Trek just got political in the last couple of years, Connor. I don't know what you're talking about.
Obviously, yeah. I'm sorry, ignore everything I just said for the last 10 minutes.
I'm just making fun of the idiots online, everyone. Don't worry.
yeah. This show definitely not woke.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Yeah. Anyway, that is our thoughts on the season 2 premiere of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Let us know what you think of this episode, and of course, you can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. And whatnot. But next time it'll be Star Trek Next Gen. They just bounce back and forwards, but I will tell you what's coming next. Well, should I? Because it's a 3-parter. Maybe I shouldn't.
I don't know. We usually don't, but this feels like less of a, compared to some of the 2-parts where it's like, well, it's just the next part. It's just the conclusion. This feels like it might have a bit more of a focus, being a middle episode.
Yeah. I mean, it's called The Circle, so I mean, it's not surprising the focus.
Okay, so I can kind of guess what it's getting at already.
Yeah, Kira spends some time with Vadic Bareil on Bajor, just as the Circle begins receiving arms from an unknown source. So the Circle definitely feel like they're going to be, at least for this 3-parter, if not the season, it feels like the Circle are going to be a major thing to contend with. I will
just like to say, adding them, okay, there's arms dealing on the side to them definitely adds more to all the stuff I was just talking about.
Oh, sure. Yes. And is it Cardassia who are selling them arms? That feels like...
yeah, that feels very, very likely. But
although that said, though, these people are very anti-non-Bajorans because of Cardassians, so maybe...
Yeah, but if the Cardassians want an excuse to come back to war...
it would be like a sad irony if it is. Which I guess maybe is why they would do it, like from a writing perspective. So many possibilities. But anyway, that is what's coming next time on Deep Space Nine. But next time you'll be looking at The Next Generation, Season 7, Episode 2. So thank you very much for joining us. We always appreciate it. Keep watching Star Trek. And, you know, that Cardassian who thought he was going to have his way with Kira, I think he's a nice splash, cold bit of water. Maybe Odo could splash himself onto him to kill him off a bit.
Bit of Odo juice.